Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. I'd also love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Please hype me on YouTube. Thanks. The first time Ryan ever touched me, I remember how cold his hand felt on my shoulder. Not cold like someone who just came in from winter air, but cold like something that had no business being warm in the first place. I was bent over a crate of canvases trying to wrestle a splintered frame into place when his fingers landed there, light, almost absent. But the touch lingered too long. I startled, turned, and his face was inches from mine. Eyes pale, watchful, unreadable. "Careful," he said. Voice low and flat, as though he wasn't warning me about the frame at all. I laughed it off, muttered something about splinters, but I carried that cold with me for the rest of the day. Even now, I wish I had listened to the warning in it. Back then, I was 19, stranded between the life I wanted and the one I had. I'd quit my last job at a coffee shop after a bad run with a manager who thought my hours belonged to him, and school didn't start until spring. Days were long and empty, so when my childhood friend Eli called asking if I wanted to help out at the art collective he'd been building, I said yes without hesitation. The collective wasn't glamorous, an old warehouse at the edge of the city, its walls stained with decades of paint, the air always tinged with turpentine and mildew, but I liked it. I liked how the work tired me out, left me too exhausted to brood about the uncertain future. Most mornings I'd leave my apartment at 9, shoes crunching frost as I walked the 3 kilometers there, and most nights I wouldn't stumble home until after midnight. I'd built little rituals into those walks. On the way out in the morning, I always stopped at the same corner cafe for a black coffee, strong enough to make my teeth ache. And on the way back, if it wasn't too late, I'd pause by the cracked stone fountain near Oakwood Park. There was a bench there where I'd sit and retie my boots before the last stretch home. Those rituals grounded me, made me feel like I belonged somewhere. That's why later, when I saw Ryan's car parked near that cafe, engine idling even though he never bought coffee there, something inside me twisted. He wasn't just anywhere. He was where I was, but I'm getting ahead of myself. At first, I thought Ryan was just awkward. He wasn't the only one drifting around the warehouse. People came and went, artists, assistants, volunteers. But Ryan, he was different. He never joked, never smiled unless someone forced it out of him. And even then, it looked like a mask he'd borrowed, not something he owned. He stood at the edges of conversations, his eyes on you when he thought you weren't looking. One night, as we were cleaning brushes, my other friend Mark leaned close and whispered, "He gives me the creeps." Always standing there like he's waiting for something. "He's harmless," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Probably just bad with people," Mark snorted. "Or he's planning where to bury the bodies." I laughed too loud and Ryan's head jerked toward us, eyes pinning me like he'd heard every word. It was just after Christmas when everything shifted. We'd stayed late, 5 of us, huddled in the dim warehouse with cheap beer and leftover pizza. By midnight, I was done. I pulled on my hoodie and told the guys I was heading out. "Want a ride?" Mark offered. "Nah." The walk clears my head. The streets were empty, snow crusted along the gutters, crunching underfoot. My breath fogged in front of me. That's when I noticed the car. Parked just ahead, engine running. A beat-up sedan with pink trim along the rims, gaudy, out of place in the gray street. I walked past, eyes forward. Then I saw him through the glass, Ryan, hands clamped to the steering wheel, knuckles bone white, not watching the road, watching me. My pulse kicked. I sped up, tried to shake it off. Maybe coincidence. But then 2 blocks later, there it was again. Same car, same pale face behind the windshield. By the 3rd sighting, parked at the intersection near Oakwood Park, headlights slicing the night, I knew it wasn't random. He was following me. My stomach turned to ice. My mind ran through possibilities. The park path, yes, the one cars couldn't reach. I veered down a side street, pulled my hood low, then sprinted when I reached the alley. My boots slammed against the pavement, breath tearing ragged from my throat. Behind me, the engine roared, then cut off. I ducked into the park, branches skeletal against the sky. I crouched behind a cluster of bushes, forced my breathing shallow, ears straining. Silence pressed in heavy. No footsteps, no car door, nothing. After 10 long minutes, I dared to peek out. Empty. The road was empty. I made it home shaking, checked my lock 3 times, then shoved a chair under the knob. My apartment was small, a studio with peeling linoleum and one narrow window, but that night it felt like a fortress. I didn't sleep. Every creak of the pipes, every groan of the old building made me flinch. The next morning I walked into the warehouse bleary-eyed. Ryan was already there. He looked up, smiled, and said, "Hey." Like nothing had happened, I avoided him all day. But his eyes found me again and again, watching, weighing. By evening I was strung out. I left without a word. Halfway home my stomach dropped. The car, parked at the end of the street, lights off. A shape in the driver's seat, still and heavy. I ran, not home. I ducked into the convenience store instead, fingers trembling as I dialed. "Mark?" My voice shook. "He's following me, Ryan. He's outside." A pause, then, "Stay there." "I'm coming." "Don't move." 15 minutes later, Mark stormed in, scanning the aisles. "All right, let's get you home." We stepped outside. The car was gone. "You sure it was him?" "I'm sure." He nodded grimly. "Then I'm driving you. From now on." That night, I barricaded my door with furniture. I didn't sleep, not even when exhaustion clawed at my bones. And just past midnight, the sound came again. Low, steady, crawling. I crept to the window, peeled back the curtain. The car was there, pink trim glinting faintly in the streetlight. Idling, waiting, my stomach dropped out of me. My hand moved before thought. The phone. The police. Words spilled from me, jumbled, half senseless, but urgent. By the time the flashing lights painted my walls, the car was gone. The officers nodded, wrote things down, promised to keep an eye out. But their eyes told me something else. Doubt. Ryan never came back to the warehouse after that night. He vanished, as if he'd never been there at all. But here's the thing, I still saw him. Not in the flesh, not clearly, but in flashes. Reflections in dark windows, silhouettes on corners, shadows behind parked cars, and worse, sometimes the car itself. Not always parked outside my apartment, but closer, near the cafe where I got coffee, near the fountain where I stopped to tie my boots. Places he shouldn't know. Places only I went, the message was clear. He knew me. He was inside the rhythm of my life. The police left, their cruiser's red and blue still echoing across the glass of my window long after they were gone. I sat there on the floor, knees drawn to my chest, staring at the empty street, waiting for the car to return. It didn't that night, but the damage was done. From then on, I carried Ryan with me, even when I couldn't see him. I tried to convince myself it was over, that maybe the cops scared him off, that maybe he had gotten bored. But it didn't feel finished. It felt like something hovering just out of sight, biding its time. The next morning, I texted Eli that I was sick, wouldn't make it to the warehouse. My thumbs shook as I typed, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. What would I even say? "Hey, your creepy assistant followed me home 3 times last night. Think he's going to kill me." It sounded insane. Mark knew. He texted around noon, "You okay?" I wanted to tell him no, that I hadn't slept, that I couldn't stop replaying the moment I pulled that curtain back and saw the pink trim glowing in the streetlight. But instead I wrote, "Yeah, fine. Thanks for last night." His reply was quick. "Call me if anything happens, seriously. Even if you just think something's off." I clung to that like a lifeline. Mark had been around since we were kids. I still remembered the summer we both got caught in a thunderstorm at the lake. I'd panicked. Sure, we'd drown in the black water, lightning cracking too close. He was the one who grabbed my arm and pulled me to shore, breathless and soaked, but alive. He'd always been the one who noticed when I was spiraling, who pulled me back, and now, all these years later, here he was again, tethering me to something solid while the world tilted sideways. Still, no matter how much I tried to lean on that memory, I couldn't shake the sense that Ryan wasn't gone. 2 nights later, I woke to a noise. Not loud, but sharp enough to drag me out of shallow sleep. A click, a scrape. I froze, listened. Another scrape, this time closer. My breath caught. I slipped out of bed, toes cold against the floor, and moved toward the window. My curtain was thin, threadbare, but I pressed it aside with 2 fingers, just enough to peer through. Nothing. The street was empty, washed pale under the lamplight. But then I noticed it at the corner of the block. Too far to see clearly, a shadow stretched unnaturally long. A person standing where the lamplight cut off, still, watching. My mouth went dry. I blinked, and it was gone, not walked away. Not faded, just gone. I stepped back from the window, heart slamming. The scrape echoed in my ears, even though the street outside was silent. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I convinced myself it wasn't real. Sleep deprivation, nerves, too much caffeine, easy explanations. But when I walked past the cafe that day, my chest tightened because Ryan's car was there, not parked across the street. Not idling in plain view. No, it was in the narrow alley just behind the cafe, where only someone who knew about my morning stop would think to wait. The pink trim glinted in the pale sun, unmistakable. I turned on my heel, walked away fast, coffee forgotten. That night, I texted Mark. I saw it again. Where? By the cafe. He didn't reply right away. I imagined him staring at his phone, jaw tight, trying to figure out whether to call me crazy or believe me. When his response came, it was simple. You're staying at my place tonight. No arguing. I wanted to say yes, wanted to give in, let myself feel safe for even one night. But a voice inside whispered that it wouldn't matter, because this wasn't just about where I slept. It was about me, about my life, my routines, the places I thought were mine alone. Ryan knew them now. He lived inside them still. I went. Mark's apartment was small, cluttered with stacks of vinyl and textbooks, but warm. He tossed me a blanket for the couch and tried to joke, tried to cut through the tension. But sometime after 2 a.m., I woke again. The sound was faint, muffled through glass, but unmistakable. The low hum of an idling engine. I sat up, my throat closing. Slowly, I crossed the room, peeled back Mark's curtain. Across the street, parked under the lone streetlight, was the car, pink trim glowing like a wound. I shook Mark awake, my voice breaking. He looked, cursed under his breath, and pulled on his jacket. That's it. We're calling the cops again. But when he yanked the curtain wider, the street was empty. I swear to you, it was there. I saw it. The hum still rattled in my chest. But the street outside was bare. Mark looked at me, concern etched deep. You need sleep. That's all. Maybe he was right. Maybe my mind was eating itself alive. But the next morning, when I walked back to my apartment, I stopped dead on the sidewalk. On the bench by the fountain, the one where I always sat to retie my boots, there was a folded slip of paper. I knew before I opened it what I'd find. Inside, in neat block letters, was a single line: I like watching you tie them. My stomach turned. My hands shook so hard I dropped the paper into the slush. He knew. He knew. I ran the rest of the way home, locked myself inside, and slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor. My breaths came short, shallow. I don't know how long I stayed there, staring at the door, waiting for the scrape, the click, the sound that would mean he was inside. It never came. But later that night, when exhaustion finally dragged me under, I dreamed of the touch on my shoulder again, that cold, weightless touch. Only this time when I turned, there was no face. Just emptiness and a voice that said, "Careful." I woke, gasping, nails dug into my palms. It's been weeks since then. Ryan never came back to the warehouse. His name isn't on any record. Eli swears he doesn't remember hiring him at all. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. The engine idling, steady and patient. And sometimes when I walk past the fountain, I see boot prints in the slush where no one should have been. So tell me, was Ryan ever real? Or did something else wear his shape just long enough to learn me? Because the truth is, I don't think this was about him at all. I think it was about me, and I don't think it's finished. I noticed his office before I noticed the people. The first day I started at Vexton Analytics, still trying not to wrinkle my new blouse, still trying to make my nervous smile look like confidence. I caught sight of it down the corner hallway on the 12th floor. Frosted glass, always dim behind the blinds, with a single brass nameplate, Heron MGR. The door had weight, not literal weight, but the kind you feel when your eyes are pulled toward something that doesn't want attention. I didn't know then why my stomach tightened when I passed it. I didn't know why I avoided walking too close, preferring the long route to the elevators instead. On my second day, I made the rookie mistake of asking about it. Is he in? I asked one of my coworkers, a woman named Denise, who sat near the copier. Her reaction was immediate. She didn't meet my eyes, didn't even stop stapling the reports in her hands. He's always in, she said flatly. then switched the subject to where the coffee machine was. Her tone was final, like I'd crossed some invisible line. I laughed it off because what else do you do? Corporate jobs are full of invisible bosses. Executives whose only trace is a signature block. Names whispered at meetings but never faces in the cafeteria. But at Vexton, Heron wasn't just another executive. His name carried weight. People lowered their voices when they said it. HR used his name like a gavel. Heron signed off. That was enough to end an argument, shut down a request, kill a question. Still, for months I never saw him. Not once. Until the night I stayed late. It was a Tuesday, nearly 8. Most of the floor was dark except for my little circle of lamplight. I was untangling a corrupted report when a voice behind me said, calm and low, "That's not how we do things here." I spun so fast my chair screeched against the carpet. He was tall, suit black and perfect, tie pulled tight enough to choke. His skin had the bloodless cast of someone who lived under fluorescent bulbs. His eyes were sharp, almost pinpoints under the buzzing lights. "Mr. Heron?" I asked. He didn't answer. He leaned, glanced at my screen, and said, "Do it again." My mouth went dry. "It's almost finished. I just need to do it again." The words didn't rise, didn't sharpen. They landed like lead. He turned, walked down the hallway, and vanished into his office. The door shut without a sound. The next morning, the file was gone. Not corrupted, not deleted, gone. IT swore nothing had been saved under my login. That was the first crack. The second came 2 nights later. I was working late again, the office wrapped in unnatural stillness. At midnight, my screen froze. My heart clenched before the voice even came. Sloppy, he was behind me. Same suit, same pale face, same voice weighted like an anchor. "You'll never succeed cutting corners." His hand came down, one finger pressing the keyboard. Every window on my screen closed at once. My work hours of it evaporated. Do it again from the top. I stayed until 3 in the morning, re-entering every line of data. My eyes ached. My wrists burned. When I finally dared look up, he was sitting across from me in the visitor's chair, silent, watching. I blinked. He was gone. By the end of that month, it became routine. If I stayed past dark, he came. Sometimes to criticize, sometimes to whisper pathetic, "Do it again." Sometimes just to stand and wait until I broke, until I started over. I asked in the break room once, casual testing. "Hey, does Mr. Heron ever stop by your desks?" Forks froze against plates. No one answered. Finally, Denise spoke without looking at me. "Don't ask about him. That's how you get noticed." The gaslighting began soon after. Emails sent from my account at 3 in the morning. Reports finished under my name that I had never touched. My manager clapped me on the back one morning. "Great work on the overnight push." I hadn't been in the building. Files appeared in my drafts folder with a stamped line. Approved? Heron. When I showed them to IT, they swore no such account existed. HR sent me a warning about lateness. My timesheets were spotless. When I tried to protest, the rep tilted her head. "Maybe you're forgetting," she said softly, like she was talking to a child. I asked her outright. "Heron's the one flagging me, isn't he?" Her smile tightened. There is no Mr. Heron here, but the door was still there. The nameplate still gleamed, and every night I stayed late, he was waiting. And then it became personal. The first time it was small. I unlocked my desk drawer one morning and found the contents arranged in a perfect grid. Pens parallel, sticky notes squared. My favorite photo, the one of me and my sister at the lake sitting neatly on top. I never kept it there. Another night, my desktop wallpaper, normally the default blue, had been replaced with a photo I didn't recognize. Rows of identical cubicles fading into darkness. At home, it followed. I opened my notebook to find half the pages blank, the other half filled with handwriting that wasn't mine. Do it again. Never done. Never done. Once, when I was humming nervously to myself at my desk, a habit I'd had since childhood, I froze. From the hallway, I heard the same tune, hummed softly in a deeper voice. When I looked, Heron was standing at the end of the aisle, still as a statue. And that night, when he spoke, he used my words, my nervous filler phrases. My own voice turned against me. I tried to quit. I drafted the email. My manager called me in. Her tone was tight, polite, but final. Transfers are frozen. Policy change. I went to HR, demanded paperwork. Angela, the rep, gave me that same smile. There is no such policy. You must have misunderstood. I tried to resign in writing. The letter vanished from my sent folder. Then one morning an email appeared in my inbox. Addressed to me, from me. Subject: resignation withdrawn. I'll stay. My stomach turned cold. By now his presence carried more than words. When he entered the room, the air changed, colder, thinner, with a faint dry smell like paper left too long in boxes. The fluorescents hummed louder. My skin prickled as though I'd stepped into a current, and the building itself shifted. One night I left my desk for the bathroom. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, every fluorescent flickering slightly out of sync. Another night his door was on the opposite side of the hall. Once I looked up and saw him at the far end of the aisle. Every time I blinked, he was closer. Do it again, he whispered when he was inches from my ear. The next morning, every file I'd saved was gone. I started writing by hand in a spiral notebook to prove to myself what was real. But pages disappeared. Or worse, filled with his handwriting: "You don't belong here." Do it again. Never done. The final straw before everything broke came when I went home one night, desperate to escape. I opened my apartment door and froze. My desk chair, my office desk chair, was sitting in the middle of my living room. On it, neatly stacked, were the same reports I'd been working on hours before, and at the bottom of the stack, approved, Heron. The walls of my apartment suddenly felt as thin as cubicle partitions. That Friday, I knocked on his office door. I don't know what I thought I'd do. Demand answers, maybe. Confront him. The door opened by itself. Inside was not an office. It was an endless floor of desks, stretching farther than the lights reached. Figures sat at each one, typing endlessly. Faces blurred like smeared photographs. Their mouths moved silently like they were whispering to themselves. At the far end stood Heron, taller now, tie hanging like a black noose. "Sit," he said. My legs moved without permission. A desk waited, papers stacked high, monitor glowing with numbers I didn't understand. Do it again. I typed until my fingers blistered. When I woke in my apartment the next morning, my wrists ached. My shirt was stained. My inbox overflowed with completed reports I didn't remember writing. All signed, approved, Heron, and that was only the beginning. Because the more I tried to stop, the more the walls between worlds thinned. The 12th floor wasn't just an office anymore. It was everywhere. And Heron was no longer just in the building. He was in me. I thought after that night, the endless rows of desks, the faceless workers, the commands that dragged my hands across the keyboard until I bled, that I had hit bottom, that there was no further to fall. But the truth was that was only the threshold, because after you see Heron's office, you stop belonging anywhere else. The following Monday, I tried to act normal. I came in on time, smiled too much at Denise, pretended to care about the numbers on my screen. But normalcy had a way of rotting fast. By mid-morning, I noticed my desktop icons were rearranged. Not deleted, not corrupted, just stacked into a perfect spiral on the screen. At the center was one word spelled out with the icons themselves: again. I swallowed hard. Nobody else's computer looked like that. By lunch, my stapler was missing. At 3, I opened my drawer and found it there, but gleaming clean, polished like it had never been touched. On top of it was my sister's photo again, her smile frozen, the lake behind her blurred into static. Every detail whispered, he was closer than ever. That night, I stayed late because there was no other option. The reports piled higher each day, and any attempt to cut corners was erased. At 10:15, the air changed. Thin, brittle. The smell of old paper pressing against my throat. I didn't need to turn to know he was there, but I did. He was standing inches away, his face too pale, too still. And when he spoke, it wasn't his voice, it was mine. "You'll never get it right. You always rush," I froze. My exact words, spoken weeks ago when I'd scolded myself under my breath after making a typo. His lips didn't quite match the words, like an echo slightly out of sync. Then he tilted his head, hummed low and steady. The same tune I hummed without realizing when I was anxious. I wanted to scream, to shove the monitor over to run, but I didn't. I started typing harder, faster, as if that would shut him out. It didn't. When I blinked, he was sitting in my chair, my body already pushed out of it, watching as my fingers moved across the keys. Only, those weren't my fingers. The hands on the keyboard were paler, thinner. Nails too perfect, Heron's hands. I stumbled back. The screen filled line by line, reports I'd never seen, words typed faster than thought. My body trembled as if I were the one doing it, as if the movement had been stolen from me. "Do it again," he whispered, his voice coming from my own throat. I don't remember leaving that night. When I woke, it was at home. My laptop sat open on the table, glowing in the dark. On the screen was a report, finished, signed, stamped. "Approved, Heron." The title bar read, "Final Evaluation, my name." The document was only 3 words repeated down every page, "Never done." I stopped trusting my apartment after that. Every time I came home, something was wrong. Once my shoes were lined up in a neat row, soles polished. Another time, my coffee mug sat on the counter, filled halfway, steam still rising as if it had just been poured. The worst was when I found my bedroom mirror covered in sticky notes, not in my handwriting, all in his sharp, precise script. "Do it again. You don't belong, never done." I tore them down. Hours later, they were back. I tried to tell HR again. Angela's smile was patient, almost motherly. "There is no Mr. Heron here," she said, same as always. But as she spoke, I saw movement through the glass behind her. Heron stood in the hallway, perfectly still, tie swaying like it was caught in a breeze that didn't exist. His eyes locked on mine, and then, this part I know I didn't imagine, Angela's voice softened into something different. Her lips still moved in polite HR cadence, but the sound I heard was his. "Do it again." I couldn't quit. Not officially. My resignation letters vanished. My attempts to transfer hit invisible walls. Even when I tried to simply walk out and not return, I found myself back at my desk the next morning, exhausted, wrists sore. Reports on the screen I didn't remember creating. The 12th floor wasn't just where I worked. It was where I was trapped, and the longer I stayed, the less real anywhere else became. The office itself twisted deeper each week. One night, I walked toward the elevators and realized the hallway had no end. The lights kept stretching ahead, fixtures doubling, tripling until the glow made me dizzy. Another night, I found myself at Heron's door when I hadn't meant to go near it. The brass nameplate gleamed brighter than the fluorescence. My reflection warped in its surface, too pale, eyes pinpricks of light. When I tried to step back, my shoes didn't move. "Come in," a voice breathed from behind the glass. I bolted before the handle turned. I started to notice faces in the endless cubicles. Not blurred, not anonymous like before. Familiar. One belonged to a woman I remembered, Janice from accounts. She'd quit suddenly 2 months ago. Another was Paul, who had resigned for health reasons. Their eyes were pale smudges now, fingers moving endlessly over keyboards. And then one night I saw myself. Not directly. Not like looking in a mirror. Just a glimpse of a woman at a desk down the aisle. Same blouse I'd worn the day before, same chipped nail polish. Her face blurred, but her hands moved fast, blistered red, typing. I couldn't watch. I couldn't not watch. By then, my own body was betraying me. At my desk, my hands would start moving before I decided to. Fingers twitching, typing sequences of numbers I didn't understand. I'd try to stop, to pull back, but my wrists ached until I gave in. Sometimes I felt my mind lift away, floating above my body. Watching myself work without knowing why. Detached, like I wasn't a worker anymore, like I was the work itself. The climax came, though climax isn't the right word because nothing ends here, on a Friday night. I don't remember walking to his door. I only remember it opening. Inside, the endless office stretching farther than sight, lit by cold fluorescent suns. Rows and rows of workers, faces blurred into gray smears, hands typing until the skin peeled from their knuckles. The air reeked of old paper, dust, something like burned plastic. My lungs seized on every breath. Heron stood at the far end, taller than any man should be, tie dangling like a noose, suit pressed into geometry that didn't look human. "Sit," he said. My legs obeyed. The desk that waited for me was stacked with paper, monitor glowing with lines of code and numbers that shifted every time I blinked. Do it again. I typed until the blisters broke, until blood smeared across the keys. My breath came ragged, but the work didn't stop. Couldn't stop. And when my head finally lifted, I realized something. The faces around me weren't blurred anymore, they were crushed, flattened, like photographs pressed under glass, expressions frozen in horror or despair. Souls compacted into silence, and one of them, 2 rows ahead, was me. I saw my own face staring back, mouth moving soundlessly. I wanted to scream, but the sound came out wrong. It came out as him. Do it again. That was the last night I remember clearly. Now I don't leave. Not really. Sometimes I wake in my apartment, but it's never safe. Reports stacked neatly, sticky notes whispering the same words, my reflection too pale in the glass. Sometimes I think I'm still in that endless office. Sometimes I think I never left. The rows stretch forever. The typing never stops. My fingers move even when I try to hold them still. My voice whispers words I don't mean. And Heron, always Heron, leans close, breath cold in my ear. Do it again. And I do. Because I can't remember what life was before. Because I am not just working anymore. I have become the work itself. The first time I heard the applause, I thought I was losing my mind. It was faint, almost polite, like hands brushing together in a theater after a middling performance. But there was no theater, no audience, no reason for the sound at all. Just me, alone in the fluorescent half-light of an office that never truly slept. The applause slipped through the vents, threaded itself into the hum of the computers, and vanished before I could even decide if it was real. For almost 3 years, I'd worked at Creighton and Hurst, a financial services firm that prided itself on precision, order, and a culture of silence. People came in early, stayed late, and spoke only when necessary. Nobody laughed in the hallways. Nobody lingered over coffee. I thought I had gotten used to the company's sterility, its strange, airless efficiency, until that sound. Until I realized there were places in this building I had walked past 100 times but never truly seen. The auditorium was one of them. It sat in the basement, directly across from the parking garage elevators. Huge double metal doors with brushed steel handles, a bronze plaque screwed into the wall above them. Company auditorium, for scheduled use only. For 3 years, I never saw the doors open. Nobody mentioned them during onboarding. Nobody joked about it at lunch. It was as if the auditorium existed only as negative space, a shadow cast by the building itself. Then, late one Tuesday night, everything changed. I was the only one still on the 12th floor. The city outside looked like static, rain streaking against the windows, headlights smearing into the fog. My computer pinged. A calendar invite appeared, covering the entire screen before I could even click anything else. Mandatory final performance. Time, midnight. Location, auditorium. At first, I thought it was a phishing attempt. I clicked decline, but the button was grayed out. I tried to delete the invite and the screen froze. A second later, it blinked back into place, pulsing faintly as though it were alive. My phone buzzed in unison, the same invite throbbing at the top of my calendar app. I laughed nervously to myself. Cute. Very cute, I muttered, but the sound of my own voice in the empty office unsettled me. I shut down for the night, telling myself it was a glitch, but the invite never left. The next morning, I asked casually at coffee, "Hey, did anyone else get something weird about the auditorium?" The reaction was immediate and wrong. People stared at me blankly, like I had spoken in another language. One woman laughed and said, "We don't even use that thing." A man across the table leaned closer and whispered, almost afraid of his own words, "What auditorium?" That sentence stuck to me like a burr. By Thursday, things escalated. 3 people from our usual lunch group didn't show up. Their chairs were still tucked under the table, their meals half-eaten as though they had just stepped away. But when I asked about them later, nobody seemed to notice they were missing. Their computers glowed with unfinished drafts, emails half-typed, yet their names had vanished from the daily attendance list. That afternoon, the intercom system crackled to life. I nearly jumped out of my chair. It hadn't worked once in the entire time I'd been employed there. A flat voice filled the floor. Rehearsal commencing. All participants returned to your roles. And then silence. No one else reacted. The clacking of keyboards continued around me as if nothing had happened. I looked from face to face, searching for some flicker of acknowledgement. but every expression was as glassy and untroubled as a mask. That night, when I rode the elevator down to the garage, it stopped on a floor that didn't exist. The button panel didn't even have a number for it, just a faint white glow where a number should have been. The doors slid open to reveal a dark corridor stretching farther than it should have. From deep inside, I heard it, applause. Dozens, maybe hundreds of hands clapping in perfect unison. I slammed the button for the lobby until the doors closed. By Friday, the invite at the top of my calendar pulsed faster, like a heartbeat, final performance, mandatory. I told myself I wouldn't go. I told myself I would leave early, drive straight home and forget about all of it. But at 11:45 p.m., I was standing in front of the basement doors. My hand hovered above the cold steel handle. The doors were already open. Cold air spilled out, smelling of dust, mildew, and something faintly sweet like rotting fruit. The auditorium stretched impossibly far inside, larger than the building could ever contain. Rows upon rows of seats receded into the dark, and every single one was filled with my co-workers. They sat perfectly still, hands folded neatly in their laps, eyes glassy. None of them blinked. The stage glowed under harsh white light. It held only a desk, a chair, and a computer. A voice drifted from the shadows. "Take your place." I turned, and a figure stepped forward. It was tall, impossibly tall, dressed in a black suit that shimmered like static. Where its face should have been was only a blur, features flickering in and out like a broken transmission. "You've been performing all along," it said. "Tonight the audience watches." The crowd clapped once in unison, a single deafening crack that rattled my ribs. My feet carried me to the stage as though I had no choice. The desk was identical to mine upstairs. Same scuffed surface, same stacks of paper, same blinking cursor on the monitor. "Begin," the figure commanded. So I did. I typed numbers. I moved files. I filled cells and spreadsheets and sent meaningless emails. All the mindless busy work I'd done every day for 3 years. At first, nothing happened. The audience watched silently. Then I hit the wrong key. The applause erupted. It wasn't warm or encouraging. It was mocking, sarcastic. Every clap drilled into my skull, sharp and rhythmic. My stomach churned. "Correct it," the figure hissed. I fixed the mistake with trembling hands. The applause stopped instantly. Silence pressed in, heavier than the air. Hours passed. Every time I faltered, the audience roared with mocking claps. Every time I corrected myself, the silence returned. My skin prickled, sweat soaking my blouse, my throat aching with thirst. I scanned the seats for familiar faces. And I saw them, not just my coworkers, but people I'd never met. Rows upon rows of workers in outdated uniforms, suits decades out of style, eyes pale and hollow. Their mouths moved silently in unison, whispering something I couldn't hear. The auditorium wasn't just full, it was endless. "You belong to the script now," the faceless figure said. "Don't disappoint the audience." I tried to stand, but the chair held me fast. The desk anchored me. My body obeyed only the rhythm of the applause. At first I hated it. Then slowly I needed it. I began to make mistakes on purpose just to feel that wave of sound crash over me, just to know I was being seen. The applause filled something hollow inside me that I hadn't even known was there. That was the real trap. Not the stage, not the figure, the audience. Sometimes I thought I was back at my desk upstairs, typing under the fluorescent lights, coworkers passing, printers humming. But then I'd hear it, clapping from the vents, from the walls, from inside my own ears, and I knew I was still on the stage. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks, years. Time has dissolved. The seats stretch forever, filled with everyone who's ever worked here, everyone who's ever given their life to the company. Above them, the ceiling is gone. A black void yawns overhead, and in that void float eyes, thousands of them unblinking, watching every keystroke. The director leans close, faceless grin flickering. "Do it again," it whispers. "They love it when you do it again." And I do. Because if you ever hear applause in your office when no one else is there, don't look for where it's coming from. Don't follow it. Because if you do, you'll learn the truth you've been performing all along, and the audience never lets you leave the stage. I never told anyone about the hum, not even Melissa. It began the very first week I started working the graveyard shift at the shipping facility in Springfield, Illinois. At first it was so faint I thought it was the air conditioning. a low-frequency buzz threading through the cavernous building. But then it began to change. It wasn't just sound. It was pressure, like a vibration in my chest, sometimes in my teeth, humming just below what ears are supposed to hear. Every time it came, I felt the sensation of eyes boring into me, though no one was looking. That warehouse was a monster of concrete and flickering lights. The size alone made you feel small, swallowed. The smell of diesel and cardboard glue stuck to your skin. The forklifts beeped without rhythm, and the walls echoed back every sound until you couldn't tell where anything originated. But the hum didn't echo. It slid underneath everything else, alive, constant. Sometimes I'd stop, gripping a box tighter than I needed, and swear it pulsed in time with my heartbeat. The hours were brutal, 3 a.m. to 11 a.m., a schedule meant to shred sleep and blur reality. I thought I'd get used to it, but instead the lines between waking and dreaming smeared together. Shadows moved at the edge of vision. Machines groaned like they were speaking, and always beneath it all the hum. Most of us lived on caffeine and routine. We weren't a family, but we kept each other sane. Or so I thought, until I met Eric. At first, he seemed like just another body in a reflective vest. Tall, sharp features, too thin frame, skin stretched tight as though he hadn't slept in years. But what unsettled me most wasn't his appearance, it was his smile. It was wrong. Not absent, not forced, but misplaced. It appeared too late, lingered too long, never touching his eyes. The first time he spoke to me was during my second week. Break room, 4 a.m. I was half asleep, chewing a sandwich. He slid into the chair across from me, leaning forward like he knew me already. "You're the new one," he said. "Yeah." "Claire." My voice came out hoarse. He nodded slowly. "I already know." The hum spiked. I swear it swelled louder in the walls, vibrating through the table legs into my arms. My stomach tightened. I forced a laugh. Good memory, I guess. He didn't laugh back. He just stared. That misplaced smile stretched his lips while the hum pressed harder against my chest until I couldn't finish my sandwich. From then on, Eric hovered. If a supervisor praised me, he'd mutter just loud enough, "Brown noser." If I chatted with anyone, he'd slip in, whispering, "They don't care what you're saying." Always under his breath, just for me. And always the hum stronger when he was near, fading when he wasn't. At first I told myself every job had a bitter guy. But Eric wasn't bitter. He was focused. The first time I realized his fixation went beyond the warehouse was at the movies. Melissa and I had gone to see a thriller on a Saturday night. Halfway through, I felt my seat jolt like someone kicked it. I turned, annoyed, and froze. 3 rows back, Eric stared straight at me. The hum surged in my ears, a low throb like machinery inside my head. "That's him," I whispered to Melissa. "A guy from work, so what?" she asked, confused. But I couldn't focus on the movie. I couldn't look away. He didn't blink, didn't react, just sat there smiling faintly as though he'd been waiting. It didn't stop there. A week later, I went to a bar with 2 coworkers. We were laughing, throwing darts, trying to shake the exhaustion. Then the air shifted, the hum thickened, more physical, pressing against my skin. And there he was. Eric, standing in the corner, not ordering a drink, not speaking. Watching. At one point he walked over, plucked a dart from the board, and jabbed it toward me. Not playful, sharp, close enough that I had to jump back. "What the hell, man?" I snapped. He smirked. The hum drilled harder, higher, like a mosquito inside my skull. The bartender shoved him out. He didn't fight, didn't speak, just walked backward, grinning at me the entire way. I laughed it off to the others. But that night, lying in bed, I felt the hum under the silence of our apartment, thrumming faintly through the walls. Then came the Polaroid. Melissa and I were curled on the couch. For once, our schedules aligned. We'd just leaned in to kiss when a flash lit up the room, sudden, white-hot. My heart jumped into my throat. I yanked the curtain back, and there he was, Eric holding an old Polaroid camera, shaking the picture in his hand. The photo itself burned into my memory. Grainy black and white, Melissa and I frozen mid-gesture. Her hair caught in the glare, my eyes wide, mouth half open. The flash had turned us ghostly, like corpses propped upright. He shook the photo again and again, manic, like it was some ritual he had to complete. The hum built with each flick of his wrist, louder, deeper, rattling in my bones. I stormed outside, shouting. He didn't move. He didn't even run when I swung and punched him. Blood smeared his teeth, but he laughed. "You can't stop me, Claire." The hum spiked sharp as a blade. My ears rang. Melissa screamed behind me. I shoved him toward his car, threatening to call the cops, but he only backed away, never breaking eye contact, shaking that damn photo as if it meant more than either of us. I didn't report him. Melissa begged me, but I told myself it would only provoke him further. That was the lie I fed myself because I was already afraid that reporting him wouldn't stop anything at all. Weeks passed. The hum never left. Even at home in the quiet of night, I'd hear it, faint but constant. Sometimes I'd jolt awake, convinced someone stood at the foot of the bed. Melissa would shake me, whisper that it was nothing, but I'd lie there, feeling the hum pressing into my ribs like hands. Then one night, Melissa wasn't the one who woke me. The front door rattled hard enough to shake the frame. At first I thought it was thunder. Then a voice slipped through the cracks. "Wake up, Claire!" The hum roared, vibrating the floorboards. Melissa bolted upright, eyes wide with panic. I knew that voice. Eric. Then came the motor. Low guttural. For half a second I thought it was a motorcycle. But when the door shuddered again, splinters breaking loose, realization hit me like ice. A chainsaw, and he was cutting his way in. The chainsaw screamed into the wood, a shrill mechanical wail that cut straight through the night. Each time the blade chewed the door frame, sparks of splinters shot across the floor like shrapnel. The smell hit next. Sharp gasoline, hot metal, and the acrid sting of fresh sawdust. My lungs seized with it, and for a moment I couldn't move. The hum wasn't beneath everything anymore. It was inside everything, the walls, the floor, the vibrating air, my own skin. Melissa clawed at my arm. "Claire, do something." I dragged her toward the closet, heart thrashing against my ribs. My legs felt disconnected, like I was moving them underwater. I shoved her inside, whispering, "Stay here, no matter what." My voice cracked on the last word. The hum sharpened as I reached for the only thing resembling a weapon, and old airsoft rifle left in the garage from my brother's college. Years, plastic, useless. Yet in my hands it felt heavy, desperate, as if its shape alone could anchor me to survival. The door cracked. A jagged fissure of light and shadow then burst wide. Eric stepped through with the chainsaw thrumming in his grip. His eyes were wide, pupils blown, grin stretching too far as though he'd torn it into his face with a knife. His presence made the hum spike so violently my teeth rattled. I fired. Pellets peppered his cheek and neck, leaving tiny welts. He staggered but didn't stop. He swung the chainsaw sideways and I dove, the blade grazing my forearm. Flesh tore. Pain flared hot and immediate, blood slicking my sleeve. My scream barely rose above the hum in the engine. I scrambled back, firing again, aiming lower. A shot landed where it counted. He buckled, dropping to one knee, howling with rage and laughter tangled together. The hum shook the walls, rattled picture frames, buzzing fluorescent bulbs until they stuttered overhead. Melissa sobbed from the closet, muffled prayers spilling out between gasps. I ran to the bedroom, dragging her out with me, barricading the door with the dresser. We huddled there, clutching each other as the chainsaw's roar dulled, sputtered, and finally cut off. Silence fell. Not true silence, the hum still surged, filling every gap, but silence of machines and threats. Then the sirens came. Blue and red lights split the night as officers swarmed the house. Eric was dragged away, bleeding, limp but alive. He didn't struggle. He just smiled that same slack smile, teeth red with his own blood, whispering words I couldn't hear over the hum in my ears. The police questioned me for hours. They told me something that froze the marrow in my bones. A coworker named Darren, missing for 2 days, had been found dead in the woods near Eric's apartment. Bound, stabbed, left like trash. When they searched Eric's place, they found notebooks, page after page of names, mine circled over and over again. The ink dug so deep it nearly tore the paper. That should have been the end. We packed up and left Illinois within the week, Melissa insisting distance would heal us. A new house, a new town, a new life, but the hum came with me. The first time I saw him 2 decades ago, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. It's strange how memory works, how a laugh, a casual glance, or the scratch of a pen can still pull me back to that office and to Daniel Carter, the man who made me believe in something sinister hiding inside the ordinary. It was 2003 and my life wasn't glamorous. I had just started in the HR department at Providence First Bank, buried in paperwork and compliance reports, pushing through long days under fluorescent lights. It wasn't passion, it wasn't exciting, but it paid the rent, kept food on the table, and most importantly, gave me stability for Emily, my daughter, who was 11 then, fresh from a divorce, bruised in ways no one saw. I told myself stability mattered more than happiness. That was before I met Daniel. He was in his early 40s, maybe 5 or 6 years older than me, though he carried himself with a kind of brittle maturity that made him seem much older. He was precise in a way I had never seen. Hair neatly combed, tie never crooked, shoes polished so sharply you could mistake them for mirrors. He wasn't unfriendly. He even smiled occasionally, but there was something rigid about him, like he lived in constant rehearsal, keeping an invisible script clutched inside his mind. The first time I stepped into his office, I noticed the stillness. Everything was too exact. Pens lined in perfect parallel. Paper stacks squared off at the corners like tiny monuments. His desk calendar free of smudges. His handwriting drawn with machine-like neatness. It wasn't just organization, it was control. I told myself it was impressive. Respectable. After years of chaos in my personal life, part of me even craved that kind of order. But there was another part of me, buried, quiet, that felt a faint tightening when he looked at me. Not quite fear, not admiration either. Something more primitive, like my body knew before I did that standing too close to him was a mistake. I ignored it. At first, he was just a meticulous boss. He caught the errors others missed, insisted on exact phrasing in emails, and corrected small details in casual conversation, as if every word in the world carried weight. It was annoying sometimes, sure, but he made me feel that my work mattered. And when you're a single parent trying to hold it together, that small validation can mean everything. It was a few weeks before he began mentioning his children. Offhand at first. A son's soccer game, a daughter's art project. Nothing unusual. I was a parent too, so I leaned in. Parenting was common ground. I told him about Emily's stubborn streak, about her endless questions before bed, about how she still left her shoes in the middle of the living room like they were furniture. He listened carefully, nodding, sometimes laughing in that dry, quiet way of his. One afternoon in the break room, I remember him telling me about his son's school project, a model of the solar system, planets dangling from string. He described how Saturn's rings had fallen apart, how his son cried over the crumbling paper. For just a moment, though, his face betrayed him. His jaw tightened, his words stumbled, and then came a short, forced laugh, the kind people use when they've said too much. I noticed, but told myself not to. Parents stumble in stories all the time. Maybe he'd forgotten a detail. Maybe I was imagining things. That was the first thread of unease, but I pushed it down. We grew closer as the months passed. We ate lunch together sometimes, swapped stories about raising kids, joked about late-night homework battles. He was guarded, but I could feel him softening around me, as though I was the one person he trusted to see him. It was flattering, and lonely as I was back then, I let myself believe it was friendship. It was a Friday afternoon when he invited me to his house. Just a small gathering, he said. A few coworkers, casual, nothing fancy. I hesitated, but politeness won out. He'd been good to me, and it felt cold to refuse. Besides, Emily was at a friend's house for the night, and the thought of spending an evening away from my empty apartment seemed almost pleasant. I drove out after sunset. His neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where every lawn was clipped evenly and every driveway clean. But as I pulled up to his house, I felt the unease return. The house was dark. No cars in the driveway. No muffled sounds of voices or laughter. Just stillness thick enough that I heard my own pulse in my ears. I reached for the gear shift, ready to leave. The front door opened. There was Daniel. His shirt wrinkled, tie loosened, a glass dangling from his hand. The sharp bite of whiskey reached me before his words. "Hey, you made it," he said, voice flat. "Am I early?" I asked, forcing a smile. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Just air, soundless, no. Everyone else canceled. But you're here. That's enough," I froze. Something in me screamed to leave. I muttered that maybe another time that I should go, but before I could turn, his hand shot out and clamped my wrist. His grip was iron, the bruising pressure immediate. "Wait, you're so much like her. You'll like it down here." The words froze me more than his grip. Her. Who was she? My skin crawled. He pulled, steering me toward the hallway, toward the yawning mouth of the basement stairs. His nails dug into my skin and every instinct in my body screamed that I had seconds, only seconds. I twisted, shoving with all the weight I had. He stumbled, surprised, and I ripped myself free. My hands shook violently as I clawed at the lock, heart thundering in my throat. Behind me his voice came, no longer flat but desperate, raw. "Don't go, please, don't leave me." I flung the door open and ran. My car roared down the street, headlights cutting the night like blades. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the bruises already blooming across my wrist. Emily slept peacefully in her room, unaware. I thought about calling no one, about burying it. But then I saw the grip-marked flesh, 5-finger-shaped truths etched into me, and I picked up the phone and dialed the police. They questioned him. He denied it, said I misunderstood, said I was imagining. The bruises weren't enough. He wasn't charged, just quietly transferred elsewhere. It should have ended there. But weeks later, a coworker pulled me aside, her voice hesitant, almost guilty. "You know Daniel doesn't have kids, right?" I laughed. "What? He's never been married?" "No kids, never." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Every story he'd told me, every bond we'd formed over parenthood, every shared laugh, all fabricated, invented, constructed for me. I tried to move on. Years passed. He faded into another life, another office, another city, but I never forgot. I couldn't. Because sometimes late at night when the house is silent and the world is asleep, I hear sounds from the hallway. Not footsteps, not the settling of wood, but smaller sounds, sharper, too precise to be accidents. The whisper click of a pen being capped, the quiet rustling scrape of papers aligned perfectly edge to edge, the faint shuffle of someone rehearsing order in a world where none exists. And I know it's him, or the ghost of him, or worse, something he left inside me waiting. Because what terrifies me most is not that he's still out there. It's the thought that he's still here. The first time I felt it, I didn't know what it was. I only knew that something was wrong. It was in the hum. That low, endless vibration of fluorescent lights above my head. The manufactured buzz that made the entire office feel alive in the worst possible way. People talk about silence like it's peace, but the silence in offices isn't real. It's a counterfeit kind of quiet. The fluorescent drone. The tiny clicks of keyboards. The squeak of an office chair. The shallow cough someone tries to swallow before it escapes. All those fragments stitched together into something unnatural. Like standing inside a machine that breathes, sighs, and twitches, but never speaks. I never liked working in offices. I came from places where life spilled over every surface. Restaurants at dinner rush with the clatter of plates, the heat of fryers, the bark of orders shouted over the din. Coffee shops where the hiss of the espresso machine tangled with music, and customers argued, laughed, whispered. I used to feed off that noise. It meant there were people around me, and people meant connection, even if it was brief. But noise didn't pay bills. Not the kind I had, rent, student loans, the mountain that never stopped growing. And offices, no matter how much they drained the life out of me, paid more than waiting tables or pulling lattes. So I ended up here. Our branch sat downtown, tucked into one of those glass and steel monoliths that looked expensive from the street, but felt like mausoleums inside. Wide atriums with sterile lighting, polished floors that echoed when you walked across them. The kind of building that pretended to be impressive but stripped everything human once you stepped in. We had an open concept floor plan, no assigned desks. Every morning you signed in at a digital kiosk glowing blue in the lobby, and it gave you a seat like a ticket stub. Random, efficient, dehumanizing. Some hated it, but I didn't mind. If I came early, I could claim a window seat and watch the city below wake itself up. The street stretching out, headlights moving like fireflies, people rushing, coffee in hand. The view reminded me there was life outside, and sometimes that was enough to keep me sane. If I was late, though, I got dumped in the middle, swallowed by rows of screens and people who never looked at each other. That was the thing. No one talked. Not really. We weren't unfriendly. We were something worse. Detached. Everything we said lived inside work emails or in quick transactional exchanges about a file, a deadline, a client's request. No personal stories. No laughter that carried. No warmth. It made it easy not to notice when someone was gone. Julie. Her name lingers in me like an echo now. At the time it was nothing. Just another name. She was in her 60s, soft-voiced, polite. One of those people who drifted at the edges. Always present, never noticeable. She sat near me sometimes. She liked the window too. We'd nodded at each other a handful of times, exchanged one short conversation months earlier about something so trivial I can't remember. That was it. That was all I knew. And yet she became everything. The week it happened began like every other. On Thursday, traffic smothered me on the way in. By the time I climbed into the office, the window seats were gone. I was dropped in the middle, surrounded by glowing screens and the dull blur of shoulders hunched in concentration. On my way past the coffee machine, I saw Julie. She looked the same as she always did. Hair neat, clothes pressed, a tiredness stitched into the corners of her eyes. She moved like she always did. Efficient, quiet, a shadow going through its motions. Our eyes met. Out of reflex, I gave her a small nod. She didn't nod back, she didn't smile. Didn't blink. Just turned and walked away, and that was the last time I saw her alive. The next day, Friday, her seat was empty. I barely registered it. People worked from home all the time. Maybe she was on leave, maybe she overslept. It didn't matter. The office was the same. The drone of lights, the stale coffee smell, the endless loop of emails and spreadsheets that blurred the hours together. If anyone else noticed her absence, they didn't say a word. It wasn't until Sunday afternoon, 3 p.m., that the first fracture appeared. An email from HR slid into my inbox. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the office will be closed Monday. All employees are asked to work from home. Further details to come. That was it. Vague. Unhelpful. I assumed plumbing, maybe fumigation. I didn't care. Working from home meant one more day without the hum. But then my phone buzzed. A text from Adam, a coworker I barely knew. "Did you hear about Julie?" The words made my stomach knot. I typed back, "What happened?" The typing bubble flickered on and off, then nothing. A long pause stretched until it hurt. Finally he sent, "She was in the office. They found her yesterday. She never left." At first I didn't understand. Then I did. Julie had died at her desk. Monday I worked from home, but nothing felt right. Every time I clicked into my inbox, I thought of her. Of her sitting there Friday morning, maybe already gone while I was answering emails and sipping burnt coffee. While people around me fetched water, shifted in chairs, whispered about the weekend, maybe she was already still. And no one noticed. The thought dug into me, burrowed deeper. Tuesday, the office reopened. HR's message was clinical, detached. "We are saddened to share the passing of our colleague Julie. Our thoughts are with her family." No mention of how she was found. No acknowledgement of how long she'd been there. Just words designed to close the subject. People whispered for an hour. Then they stopped. Their screen swallowed them again, like she'd never existed. That night I stayed late, the office drained out after 6. By 8, only a handful of us lingered, each at our own glowing island of light. I worked until my eyes ached, until the numbers blurred, until silence pressed so hard against my ears I couldn't stand it anymore. I was shutting down my computer when I heard it. A whisper. Faint. So faint I thought maybe it was the air vent sighing. I froze, spine rigid, eyes darting. Nothing. The floor stretched out, empty. But my skin prickled, the hair at the back of my neck rising. I told myself it was the building settling, the hum playing tricks. Still, I packed up fast, every step echoing too loudly as I left. The next morning I came in early. The floor was nearly empty, monitors flickering here and there. I slid into a desk, my body still wound tight. I pressed the power button, the screen blinked awake and froze on Julie's login. Her name. Her ID. Her unfinished documents. I couldn't move. My pulse roared in my ears. I reached for the power button again, but before I touched it, the screen flickered and went black. And just before it did, I saw it. A reflection in the glass. A figure standing behind me. But when I spun, there was no one. Friday, I didn't go in. I called in sick, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. I lay in bed, blinds drawn, staring at the ceiling, telling myself I was unraveling. Grief could warp things, twist shadows into faces, noises into whispers. That was all it was. Then around noon, it came. An email from Julie. Subject line, "Are you there?" I couldn't breathe. I didn't open it. I didn't dare touch the keyboard. I grabbed a bag and left town before sunset, driving until the city was behind me, until my phone lost signal. When I came back Monday, her desk was gone. Cleared. Erased. Like she'd never been real at all. But the office wasn't the same. Not for me. Now, sometimes late at night, when I'm the last one left, I hear it again. The whisper. So faint it could be my imagination. The hum of the air conditioning thickens until it feels like breathing. Sometimes my monitor flickers just once, a hiccup of light. Sometimes the corner of my inbox glows with a new message, always one unread. I never open it. I don't need to, because I already know what it says. Wait for me. I never trusted the silence of that office. Not really. Not after the first time the lights flickered and my laptop screen pulsed black before it came back to life, showing me something I hadn't opened. At the time, I told myself it was a glitch. Co-working spaces weren't exactly reliable, with their mismatched wiring and budget routers, and the place where I worked, Blue Grid Technologies, a startup that still smelled of fresh paint and scorched coffee, was as patched together as anything I'd ever seen. But even then, even in the first weeks, the silence felt wrong, too sharp, too aware. I should back up. When I graduated with a degree in information systems, it wasn't because I loved the field. I'd wanted to write, maybe even teach literature, but that felt reckless, dangerous, unlivable. Information systems seemed like safer ground, a practical net I could fall into. By the time graduation rolled around, I had only one offer, an internship at a new startup in Columbus, Ohio. Blue Grid was 1 year old then, 10 of us crammed into a co-working space downtown. The ceilings were high, the cement floors cold, the desks dented, the chairs a collection of squeaking hand-me-downs. Coffee machines hissed constantly, leaving the air thick with bitterness. If you weren't careful, the smell followed you home, clinging to your hair and clothes, but I liked it. I was 23, fresh out of school, still half pretending that the world was made of endless possibilities. Being in a room full of ambitious people made me feel like I was standing at the edge of something meaningful. My boss, Maya, worked in a glass-walled office at the back, a constant silhouette behind the pane. She put in 12-hour days and expected us to match her without ever saying so outright. She didn't micromanage, though. As long as you produced results, you could sit in pajamas, blast music, or wander off for long lunches. I claimed the same spot most mornings, near the window, where I could look out at the street when my eyes got tired. Across from me sat Aaron, back-end dev from Michigan, always clutching a Monster can. To my right, Julia, our designer, who turned her desk into a riot of sticky notes and neon colors. We weren't best friends, but we were comfortable enough to complain about Wi-Fi lag together and share tacos at the truck 2 blocks down. For the first 3 months, work was predictable. Morning meetings, afternoons of quiet typing, group lunches. Then Maya announced we were bringing in someone external to help with our new server infrastructure. "His name's Mark Samuels," she said during stand-up. "He's only here a few weeks. No systems none of us are fluent in. Let him do his thing." That afternoon, he arrived. Mark was in his early 30s, a little older than the rest of us. Average height, brown hair combed neatly, wireframe glasses, always in plain button-downs tucked into slacks. He carried himself like he wanted to vanish into the walls. When Maya introduced him, he nodded once, offered no handshake, and immediately unpacked his laptop. I tried small talk. "So you're from Columbus?" "No." "Where from then?" "Doesn't matter. Flat. Final." That was the end of it. He showed up at 9 sharp every morning, sat at the same desk near the wall, and worked silently until 6. He skipped lunches, ignored coffee runs, rarely lifted his head. Nobody cared. He was efficient, and if he wanted to be left alone, so be it. On his last Friday, Julia brought bagels as a send-off. We clustered around awkwardly while Maya thanked him. Mark muttered, "Thanks," stuffed a bagel in a napkin, and returned to his seat. At 5, he packed up, shut his laptop, and left. That was it, or should have been. Because the following Monday I walked in and he was there again. Same desk, same posture, same shirt maybe. My stomach turned. I told myself his contract must have been extended, but during stand-up, Maya didn't mention him. When I asked Aaron later, "Didn't Mark leave?" He frowned. Thought he did. By Tuesday, I realized he wasn't copied on any new emails. No mentions, no tasks. Yet he came every day, clockwork precise. When I asked Maya directly, her brow furrowed. He was done. Why? "He's still here," I said carefully. She blinked at me like I'd wasted her time. "If he wants to sit in the co-working space, that's not my problem. Let him." That was Maya. Too busy for anything that wasn't burning. So Mark stayed. At first, I convinced myself it didn't matter. Freelancers drifted through the co-working space all the time, but the hum began soon after. It was subtle, so faint I almost missed it, an undercurrent in the office air. A low vibration like an old refrigerator, but heavier. Wrong. It always came from Mark's corner. No one else seemed to hear it. The longer it went on, the more it burrowed into my chest, like my own body was resonating with it. Sometimes, when I glanced up, his screen was filled with plain text. No code, no browser, just lines and lines of words. He would type, then stop, staring so long I thought he'd frozen. Then he'd type again. One night I stayed late. The office emptied. The hum thickened. Mark sat frozen, screen glowing, hands hovering above the keyboard. I packed my bag, throat dry, and forced a casual tone.
"Long night?"
He turned his head slowly. His eyes locked onto mine, expressionless. Routine. The word slithered into me, cold and final. Weeks passed. Most of my coworkers stopped acknowledging him. He was just part of the furniture, but I couldn't stop noticing. The first true crack came during a rainstorm. Everyone went to lunch except me. Mark slipped out with his umbrella, leaving his laptop open. I don't know why I did it. The rain blurred the windows and my heart pounded as I stood, crossed the floor and jiggled his mouse. The screen lit up, a folder, daily notes, dozens of files. Each labeled with a date. I opened one. Not code, not documentation logs of us, Aaron. Arrived 9:12, monster can in hand. Julia, yellow scarf, 3 bathroom breaks. Alex, white sweater, paused Spotify at 12:43, scratched wrist repeatedly. My name was everywhere. My playlist, my nervous tics, the way I brushed hair from my face when debugging. Every detail cold and meticulous. I flipped open another file and another. Months of them, my chest tightened. Sweat slicked my palms. I shoved the chair back, forced myself to walk calmly to my desk. That evening, he stood at the entrance as I left. Just stood, hands at his side, staring. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Just watched me step into the drizzle, and I knew he knew. The next day, he was gone. No laptop. No trace, nobody else even remembered. When I asked Julia, she tilted her head. Who, the server guy? Didn't he leave weeks ago? It was like he'd been erased, but the office didn't forget. The hum lingered. Cameras in corners seemed to swivel. Motion sensors blinked even when nobody walked past. My laptop flickered, files opening on their own. Once a text document appeared for a second before vanishing. Alex bit her lip at 3:12, looked at window. Didn't notice me. I stopped sleeping. Each night I swore I saw a figure across the street, still as stone, watching. I kept my blinds closed, but the glow of my laptop sometimes came on by itself. My phone buzzed with phantom notifications. My webcam clicked faintly in the dark. And then one night, I opened my laptop and found a new folder. Daily notes. This time, stamped with today's date. The words inside burned cold into my eyes. Alex woke at 7:14. Sat on edge of bed. Pulled curtains, paused. Looked at street. Didn't notice me watching. And as I read, the hum rose in my apartment, low and suffocating, vibrating the floor beneath me, the walls, my own teeth. Not just in the office anymore. Here, with me. I never thought the sound of someone whispering my name in the dark could hollow me out the way it did that night. It wasn't the whisper itself. It was the silence that followed, so absolute and deliberate as if the air itself had been listening, waiting for my reaction. My name hung there, swallowed by the dark, and I knew before I even opened my eyes that someone was standing in the doorway. My name is Emily Turner, and for 18 years I believed empathy was my sharpest weapon. I carried it like a shield, pushing back against the worst the world had to offer, convinced that if I gave enough of myself, if I listened long enough, If I believed hard enough, I could soften anyone's edges. Maybe that was my greatest flaw. I thought I could bleed for other people and never notice when I was the one slowly dying from it. In those years, I worked with individuals the world often abandoned, people with histories so jagged they cut anyone who tried to hold them. I'd sat on floors with men screaming at hallucinations, coaxed women back from the brink of suicide, listened to the static of paranoia hum in my patients' voices until I almost believed it myself. Trauma soaked into me until it was part of my bloodstream, but none of that prepared me for the night I opened my door to Hannah Kim. I met Hannah during my first decade in the field, back when I worked in a group home in Portland, Maine. 6 residents at a time, 2 floors, 1 shabby backyard, and a staff that functioned more like family than coworkers. Long night shifts bled together into one unbroken life. We passed cigarettes back and forth on the back porch, shared greasy pizza on payday, napped in lawn chairs between double shifts. That house carried us as much as we carried the residents. Hannah was new then, timid, polite, quiet to the point of invisibility. Her long black hair acted as a curtain she rarely drew aside. She wasn't the kind of person you remembered right away, but there was something about the way she listened. She tilted her head, her dark eyes locking onto yours with an intensity that made you feel exposed, as though she were peeling away layers you didn't know you had. When she smiled, rare, faint, it felt like being chosen. She slipped into our little makeshift family, joined our after-shift coffees, our birthday dinners, our barbecues. It wasn't until months later that she confessed her secret. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia when I was 19. She told me one night on the porch after a brutal double. Her voice was almost too soft for the cicadas to allow. I'm stable now, meds, therapy, all of it. I know what people think when they hear that word, but I promise I'm fine. I remember looking at her, seeing the vulnerability she tried so hard to mask. Hannah, I said, smiling. You're not your illness. You're just you. Her shoulders relaxed. For the first time, I saw gratitude flicker through her eyes, sharp and startling. That was the beginning of our strange, delicate friendship. Years later, by the summer of 2023, I had left the group home behind. I was working at Ridgeview Forensic Facility, a locked psychiatric hospital where the walls themselves seemed to breathe tension. Every patient there carried violence in their history. The job was harder, darker, and infinitely more draining. But the pay was better. I told myself I could handle it. That was when Hannah began reaching out more often. First, she missed work, migraines, stomach issues, insomnia. Then she called late at night, whispering about her eviction. I don't even know how to explain it, she said one night, her voice trembling through the phone. I went into the wrong apartment. I swear it was an accident. They overreacted. They always see me as crazy. It's not fair. I should have offered sympathy and set boundaries, but I remembered those nights on the porch, the quiet bond we'd built, the way she had once confessed her truth to me. I remembered her listening, so when she asked, "Can I crash with you? Just until I figure things out?" The word escaped me before I could stop it. Yes. She moved into my 1-bedroom apartment the following week, spreading herself across the living room like smoke. She insisted the couch was fine. She brushed off my offer of a bed. I tried to make her feel welcome, buying her a second-hand coffee machine, setting aside space in the kitchen. I reminded her about my insomnia, about my epilepsy, how crucial my rest was. Of course, Emily, I'll be quiet. I promise. That promise shattered the very first night. At 2 a.m., the clink of cups woke me. By 5 a.m., the smell of coffee thickened the air, and the hiss of her lighter echoed from the balcony. The next morning, I said gently, "Could you wait until at least 6 before making coffee?" "I need sleep, Hannah." "Oh, of course," she said, her eyes wide with apology. But it happened again. And again. No matter what compromise I offered, making coffee the night before, switching to a French press, she clung to her rituals as if her life depended on them. Then came the food disappearing, the cats avoiding her, the bathroom coated in hair and nail clippings, the saucepan scorched black, and then the pills. My sleeping medication, critical to keeping me functional, began to vanish. When I asked, she denied it flatly. "I would never touch your meds. You must have miscounted." But I knew. One evening, a message blinked onto my phone from an old coworker. "Emily, do you know the real story about Hannah's eviction?" My fingers hesitated. "What do you mean?" She broke into an apartment. They found her standing over a baby with a knife. No one was hurt, but that's why she lost the place. My blood turned to ice. From that moment on, every creak of the apartment, every shadow, every whisper of movement felt sharper, deliberate, watching. She grew more erratic. She smoked indoors. She let the cat scratch at the door. When I unplugged the coffee machine, she retaliated by boiling grounds in a saucepan. The stench acrid, bitter, clinging to the walls. And then came the night I woke at 3 a.m., my heart hammering for no reason I could name. Mark, my boyfriend, slept beside me, but in the doorway a silhouette stood, long hair veiling the face, body utterly still. "Hannah?" My whisper trembled. "What are you doing?" No answer, just silence, and then slam. The door shut, hard, as footsteps bolted down the hall. When I finally crept out, a kitchen knife lay on the floor where she had stood. After that, dread ate me alive. Days bled into nights, nights into hallucination-like fears. Sometimes I thought I saw her shadow even when she was at work. Sometimes I woke to the smell of smoke, only to find nothing burning. My cats refused to leave the bedroom. Rachel, my closest friend, came over when I confessed everything in a shaking whisper. Together, we told Hannah she had to leave. Her silence was worse than any rage I'd braced for. She just stared, her face unreadable, before finally nodding. But her last night there, she stood in the kitchen burning dry coffee grounds in a frying pan, watching them smolder with glassy eyes as if conducting some ritual I wasn't meant to understand. Smoke coiled black and acrid, crawling across the ceiling. She didn't blink. 2 days later, she was gone. Months passed before I heard from acquaintances. Hannah had stopped her medication completely. In October, she set fire to her new apartment, pouring alcohol over the flames, chanting about burning everything to save them. She fought neighbors who tried to pull her out. She was arrested for aggravated arson, committed to a secure facility. But even now, months later, sometimes I wake in the middle of the night certain I see her in the doorway. Sometimes I hear her whisper my name when the apartment is silent. Sometimes I find my cats huddled under the bed, eyes wide with the same fear I feel. I replay the saucepan, the knife, the silence. I wonder if I ever really knew Hannah, or if something else had been living inside her all along. Something older, hungrier, that wore her body like a mask until it found a new home in my apartment. Because some nights, when I walk through the dark hallway, I catch the faint smell of burning coffee grounds, and I know I'm not alone. The first time I realized the silence inside Memorial General Hospital wasn't empty at all, I almost laughed at myself. It was past 3 a.m, the waiting room lights dimmed, the hum of the vending machine echoing like a heartbeat, and the faint sound of someone's shoes squeaking down a hallway that should have been deserted. I told myself it was just one of the janitors, maybe a late shift nurse dragging her sneakers. But when the sound stopped abruptly, as if cut off mid-step, I felt something twist in my chest. That was how it began for me. The slow hollowing out of my nights, the peeling away of the thin layer of normalcy I'd built for myself after moving to Springfield, Ohio. I had thought I was starting over. I had thought I'd chosen something safe, something steady. A night shift clerk at a hospital sitting behind a desk, greeting people, logging forms. What could be more routine than that? I'd been 26, raw from a breakup. Broke enough that my cousin's tip about the front desk opening at Memorial General felt like salvation. She worked there as a nurse, and she told me it was boring work but dependable. I told myself it would be temporary. 1 year, maybe 2, until I figured out what I actually wanted. For the first few months, the job seemed almost benign. Nights at a hospital aren't like television. They're not a constant stream of blood-soaked chaos. More often, they're stretches of nothing. Plastic chairs, flickering televisions with the volume turned low, families half asleep on the waiting room benches. Sometimes the world felt entirely abandoned. At 2 or 3 a.m, with the sky black as ink and the snow pressing against the windows, I felt like I was the only one alive. That's when I got to know Nathan. Nathan was another night clerk, about my age, maybe a year older. He had the kind of build that always seemed tired. Skinny, slightly hunched, with his hands shoved into the front pocket of the same hoodie he wore every shift. He'd been there longer than me, so he taught me the ropes. At first, I liked having someone to talk to during those long stretches of silence. He had stories about patients who came in at 2 a.m. with the strangest problems, or about drunks who cursed the staff before passing out cold. I laughed with him, leaned on his presence until the night he asked me out. It wasn't dramatic. Just a quiet moment between check-ins when the waiting room was empty. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Hey, after shift sometime, you want to grab breakfast? There's this diner on Main that's pretty good." I remember the awkward tug in my stomach, the way my forced smile felt too tight. I appreciate it, but I don't mix work with that kind of stuff. He nodded fast, almost too fast. Yeah, no worries. Just figured I'd ask. But the air shifted after that. He didn't glare or sulk. He just withdrew. His voice clipped. His jokes gone. Sometimes he'd stop talking if I walked into the break room. It was subtle enough that I couldn't have complained about it. Not really. But the silence between us wasn't the same kind of silence as the hospital's. It wasn't empty. It was weighted. And then came the night. It was February, bitter cold, the kind of Midwest winter that gnawed through jackets and left patches of ice in the parking lot, no matter how many times maintenance salted it. I remember blowing into my hands as I walked into the hospital lobby, the blast of fluorescent light hitting me so hard it almost felt cruel. The waiting room had 3 people, a woman flipping through a tattered magazine, a man sleeping with his hoodie over his face, and a father holding a little boy swaddled in a blanket. The televisions were tuned to the local news with the sound turned down so low, the anchors' mouths just opened and closed like silent ghosts. I sat down at the desk. Nathan was already there, logged into his computer, the glow lighting up the hollows of his face. "Hey," I said. "Hey," he muttered, not looking at me. The silence stretched. Hours dragged. Around 2, Nathan stood, stretching like he'd been waiting for it. "Going to take my break." "All right," I said, pulling another form onto the counter. His 30-minute break came and went. Patients trickled in, the usual. Chest pains, a sprained ankle, a car accident victim arguing with her boyfriend. I scanned the security monitors out of habit. Hallways, entrances, the parking lot. Normal. When Nathan came back, his hoodie was zipped all the way up, hands buried deep in the pockets. He didn't say a word. The shift dragged on, then ended. At 7, I clocked out and walked into the biting cold. The employee lot stretched far back, dimly lit by buzzing yellow lights. My breath clouded the air and every step crunched on icy patches. I'd walked this same path 100 times. But that night, my stomach twisted like I wasn't alone. I quickened my pace. My shadow bent long under the lights. By the time I slid into my car and locked the doors, my hands were trembling. Get it together, I told myself. But the drive home felt endless. At every stoplight, I checked the rearview mirror. Empty streets, no headlights behind me. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something followed me. Something just out of sight. When I pulled into my driveway, the neighborhood was still asleep. My porch light flickered faintly, as if straining to hold back the dark. I stepped out of the car, bag over my shoulder, and froze. The lock on my front door wasn't right. Not broken, but loose, as if someone had tested it. My pulse hammered. I stood there, breath fogging, key shaking in my hand. Finally, I forced myself inside. Everything looked normal. My laptop sat on the table, the TV in its place. I checked every room, every closet, even under the bed. Nothing. I told myself I was imagining it. But when I woke later that morning, my stomach dropped. Footprints. Dirty footprints on the hardwood floor, leading from the front door to the hallway. Stopping outside my bedroom, I had taken my shoes off at the door like I always did. "These weren't mine, the police came." The officer was calm, professional. He asked if anyone else had a key, if anything was missing, if I had cameras. No. But my neighbor did. We checked the footage together. Grainy, but clear enough. A man approached my door in the dead of night, slipped something into the lock, let himself in. Stayed for almost an hour. When he stepped out again, his hood slipped just enough for me to see his face. Nathan. The police arrested him that afternoon. They said he had been inside my house watching me sleep. That should have been the end. But it wasn't, because even after he was behind bars, I couldn't shake it. Couldn't relax in my own house. Couldn't shake the thought that he hadn't been alone, that there had been something else. Something standing just beyond the camera's grainy edges. Something that stayed behind. The nights grew heavier. Every creak of the floorboards yanked me awake. Every whisper of wind against the window felt like breath. I locked the doors, then double-checked, then triple-checked. I bought cameras for every corner, lights for every shadow. Still, some nights I woke certain that someone stood over me. Not Nathan. Not anymore. Someone else. And here is where my life tilts into the part I can't explain, the part I hesitate to even tell, because once I say it out loud, it feels real. Sometimes in the dark, I hear a voice whisper my name. Not Nathan's voice. Not anyone I know. A low rasp that slithers across the room and burrows under my skin. And sometimes, when I dare to look, I see footprints again. Wet, dirty, impossible footprints. They stop just outside my bedroom door. Waiting, listening. I left Springfield, moved states away, changed everything. New job, new house, 3 locks on the door. But I can't outrun the silence because silence isn't empty. It never was. And some nights I swear the footprints are already inside. The first time I saw her lips move, I felt something shift in the air, a vibration just beneath my skin, as if the room itself had inhaled and forgotten to let go. I was 28 then, working at a modest tech firm in Portland, Haven Systems, a place I'd come to think of as less a career and more a plateau. The sort of job you don't brag about but also don't run from. My days were predictable, sometimes suffocatingly so. Cloud security, compliance, integration testing, Jira tickets. The rhythm of my life was more mechanical than human. I told myself I liked the stability, but in truth it dulled me, ground me down into someone I barely recognized. It wasn't until Elena arrived that things began to loosen, or maybe unravel. She came into the office quietly, without fanfare. HR new hire. Dark hair, pale skin, bun so tight it looked painful. At first, she blended in with the blur of half-strangers I passed in hallways or saw microwaving their lunches. But in time, she began to take up a disproportionate amount of space in my mind. It wasn't her looks. She was pretty, yes, but not in the way that keeps you awake at night. It was something harder to name, something that moved in the gaps in the moments when nobody else was looking. The first real moment happened in the break room. I'd gone in for coffee, my third that morning. The lights in there always seemed a little too bright, buzzing overhead like angry insects. That day, the air smelled faintly metallic, like the fridge had been left open too long. She was standing by the far wall, her head bent, lips moving quickly, soundlessly. Her hands hung slack at her sides. Empty. For a second, I thought maybe she was on Bluetooth. But no, nothing in her ears, nothing in her pockets. Just her and the wall. Hey, I said, trying for casual. Her head jerked, eyes locking onto mine with a sharpness that made my stomach dip. Then just like that, she softened, smiled faintly. Hi. That was it. I nodded, poured my coffee, left. But the image clung. The wall, the whispering. The way she startled like an animal pulled from a dream. I told myself it was nothing. People talk to themselves, right? Stress, rehearsal, nerves. Except I started noticing her more after that. Or maybe she was just making herself noticeable. Over the next couple weeks, the pattern repeated. Always in the break room, always to the wall. Sometimes her hair was loose, hanging like a veil across her cheeks, her mouth working fast, too fast for me to catch words. And then, one day I did. I slowed as I entered, trying not to make noise. She didn't notice. Her whisper was ragged, hurried. They don't. Not yet. Not yet, Daniel. My own name. I froze, breath catching in my throat. I nearly dropped the water bottle I'd come for. She didn't turn. Didn't stop. Just kept whispering into the blank white wall. I left without a word. That night I told myself I'd misheard. I had to have misheard. But then came the forms. A week later, during some HR compliance thing, she came by my desk with a stack of papers. Her voice was quiet but clear as she said, "Here you go, Daniel. Just my name. Normal enough." Except she lingered. For a heartbeat too long. Her gaze locked on me, eyes too sharp, too aware. "Thanks," I muttered, forcing a smile. She didn't move. Not right away. I felt heat rise in my neck under her stare. Then she turned, walked off, leaving me with the peculiar weight of her attention pressing against my chest. That night I mentioned it to Kara, my girlfriend of 3 years. We'd been drifting, though I didn't say that out loud. "She probably just has a crush," Kara said, scrolling her phone. "You're reading too much into it." Maybe, but my gut disagreed. The first real warning came from Mark. We were in the cafeteria, both of us hunched over mediocre sandwiches. I decided to test the waters, keep it light, so, is it just me or is Elena a little different? Mark's reaction was too quick. He set down his sandwich, leaned closer, his voice dropping. Difference, one way to put it. Just keep your distance, okay? She's intense. What do you mean? He shook his head. I've said too much already. Just don't get too involved. The words hung in my ears long after lunch ended. Too involved. Involved in what? After that, Elena was everywhere. Passing me in the hall, sitting across the table in meetings, appearing suddenly at the end of aisles. Her gaze flicking to me, always too quickly to confront, never long enough to prove. A presence like static electricity, brushing close, never touching. Sometimes I'd look up and see her just standing there, watching, then vanishing around a corner. The tension coiled in me tighter each day. One Friday night I stayed late. The office was nearly empty, humming with the low thrum of machines. The fluorescent lights had dimmed into energy-saving mode, half the space cloaked in shadows. As I walked toward the break room, I saw her, alone at the table, a notebook open, scribbling furiously. When she realized I was there, she slammed it shut, eyes wide, face flushing. "Hi," she said too brightly. I mumbled something, retreated. My pulse didn't slow until I was back at my desk. On Monday, her desk was empty. By Tuesday, still empty. By Wednesday, it looked abandoned. Papers scattered, coffee cups ringed with stains, and then I saw them. A pile of handwritten notes spilling across the desk. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't, but my eyes snagged on the repetition. My name, over and over. Daniel, I'm sorry. Daniel, I had to. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. My hand shook as I picked one up. I took it straight to my manager. He frowned, sighed. She quit this morning. Emailed HR. Said she needed to leave for personal reasons, just like that, gone but not gone. That night I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. A whisper. Faint. Outside my apartment door. I froze. Toothbrush dangling. Slowly I walked to the peephole. Elena stood there, her face pale, lips moving, eyes locked forward. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew. My name, over and over, my chest seized. I staggered back, grabbed my phone, dialed 911. By the time I looked again, she was gone. The cops came, searched the hall, the stairwell, the street. Nothing. One of them shrugged. If she shows up again, call us. But she hasn't committed a crime. I barely slept that night. Days blurred. Weeks. Then came the email from building management. Residents were warned. A woman had tried to enter the building. Security stopped her. She said she wanted to apologize to someone. Me. I knew it was me. After that, smaller things began. Footsteps in the hallway when I got home late. Phone calls where no one spoke. Shadows outside the lobby window that vanished when I turned my head. Kara left not long after. Said she couldn't live with the tension. Said I wasn't myself anymore. She was right, and then suddenly it stopped. No whispers. No footsteps. No shadows. Elena vanished from my days as abruptly as she had entered them. For 3 years, silence. But silence doesn't heal. It festers. Even now, I'll be walking down a crowded street and a glimpse of dark hair will make my stomach drop. A voice behind me in the grocery store will sound too close to hers. I tell myself she moved on. Found someone else to fixate on. But sometimes, on nights when the building is quiet, when the city outside is muffled and still, I hear it. A whisper by my door. My name, and I know. She never left.